Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders, make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. Guest for this episode is Rob Hansen, who is a nonprofit leader with over 2 decades of experience driving social change. His personal journey out of poverty has fueled his passion for empowering others to shape their own destinies. As the founder and president of Goodnation since 2018, Rob has orchestrated the deployment of over $65 million towards ambitious social initiatives. In 2024, he spearheaded Goodnation's Prosperity Project, a groundbreaking initiative aimed at eradicating poverty in America. His expertise goes beyond that, though, and his career includes his tenure at the Robin Hood Foundation, where he managed corporate and foundation fundraising. And during a significant economic downturn in New York City, he played a pivotal role in conceptualizing and executing the $100 million Robin Hood Responds campaign. Welcome, Rob. It's such a pleasure to have you. Before we dive
Thanks, Sarah.
into things nonprofit,
Yep.
I'd love to hear just a little more about yourself, or if you're up for sharing some of your own journey that led you here.
Yeah. So I guess I would start back, and it was noted in my bio. I did grow up and experienced poverty directly. And I think it links a little bit to what we're going to talk about is that at the time I was a kid and didn't understand some of the systems and powers and ways in which life can be organized, and they can give one more chances or fewer chances. So I was fortunate enough to find a path, and that path actually involved social change. There was a point where I got involved in my high school, and that was sort of transformational for me personally. I founded an Amnesty International group way back when and ended up getting into college as a result of that. So on scholarship. So it was a chance, and I would maybe just highlight that sometimes we're going to talk about big ideas around systems change. But fundamentally, at the bottom of it are people who are either struggling or having a hard time, and particularly children. So I kind of connect with that.
Yeah. There's nothing like experiencing poverty personally to realize the complexities, and that it is very much about systems and very little about individuals' innate anything
I think that's right. Yeah.
or genetic
Yeah.
anything. So let's talk about systems. And I think let's talk about a little bit. I know you have expertise around what's a 501c3. Maybe we can define those. What's a 501c4?
Yeah.
When and why not just be a for-profit organization? There's a
Interesting.
lot of questions
Yeah.
people have about these things. In fact, I'm just coming off of a call with my own group of clients, and there was a question about for-profit sponsors, like asking questions to them about, like, is it a donation or are they
Hmm.
paying for something? And I was just like,
Yeah.
when you're a for-profit, like, if you pay for a business expense, you don't pay taxes. And
Yep.
like, see, with a donation, it really shouldn't matter to your for-profits who are working with you in some way, whether or not technically it's a donation or a business
Yeah.
expense. Like,
Sure.
it's exactly the same, but there's just so much, it just feels scary and confusing. So break it down for us. 501c3, 501c4, what are the options here?
Yeah.
And what do
So
these things mean?
I think many of us are familiar with 501c3s. Many of us are either, I understand there's lots of leaders who listen to your podcast, board members. So 501c3 is that nonprofit. Essentially, it's synonymous in people's minds. That I think the way that started was, I can actually go back, it was the 1950s, and it was when the code was written. And the basic deal was that to be a 501c3, you could do certain things and couldn't do other things. We'll talk more about what you can't do. But what you can do is what we broadly understand to be helping people and things that create social good. And so that's pretty broadly defined by the IRS. And the important part, and this I came up out of fundraising, and this is something that every executive director will understand, that there is a tax deduction, as we all know, if you give to a 501c3. And so I think almost inadvertently, when we think we have an idea to do something to create positive change in our community, our next step is, well, how are we going to resource it? So we go and seek donations. Then we get a 501c3. So those tend to be the steps. We don't really interrogate what's happening in that structure. What you can't do in that structure is, or you can't do very much of it, work that is actually focused on the very system that is supporting, or in some cases creating, the problem that you're focused on. Or to put it differently, if you start thinking about, okay, I'm really going to think about solutions, you pretty quickly get outside of the 501c3 space. And so then you enter into the C4 space. And 501c4 is literally just like one more number in the tax code. But that number is pretty important. So a 501c4, often you'll hear action. So we have Goodnation Foundation and Goodnation Action as our C4. So the C4 has the ability to engage in systems change, lobbying. A C4 can have both an opinion about a policy, a law, a part of the system, and can actively work to change that, ideally on behalf of a community or with community participation. The 501c3, the deal essentially is, okay, if you take tax deductible gifts, you cannot spend most of your money or all of your money on changing the system. So that's what gets really interesting, is the 501c4 has that power, but you don't get a tax deduction. So now I can imagine that all of the development directors on the call are going to be like, well, okay, we're done the conversation. They may be shutting off. But I'll point out two things that we think and have experienced to be really powerful. When you work in the systems change space, the impact you can create is outsized. So we got into it by focusing on lunch policy. So instead of helping, 1,000 children who are hungry in a school at lunch, if you can change and create a universal, or help create a universal school lunch policy, it can be 10,000 kids, 100,000 kids. I'm in New York City, 1 million children. And not just 1 year, into perpetuity, or at least as long as that policy lasts. So you may not get a tax deduction, but as a donor, but you get outsized impact. I'll say what, yeah, anyway. So it's really
Well,
quite,
I just
yeah,
want to break that down because it is so important to me,
Yep.
to the audience. You need to hear this. And it
Yep.
relates to the conversation I was having, that same conversation earlier, which is that even if you're a 501c3, that donation may or may not be tax deductible for the individual,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
They may have a situation, or they may choose not to itemize their deductions, in which
Yep.
case none of their charitable things are tax deductible because they're taking the standard deduction.
Yep.
And let's remember that, like, if you donate $100,000, you do not get $100,000 tax write-off,
Yes, exactly.
right?
Yep.
Like, it's not a 1-for-1
Nowhere
ratio,
near.
right? And it could be, maybe they're getting, and it's different. It's not like, this is how much you donate, this is the percentage. It's different for people's different situations.
Yep.
And I'm not a CPA here or anything, but basics is like, so maybe they get, $300. Well, does that offset, right? Do I want my $300 tax deduction, or do I really want to help 1 million kids instead of 1,000 kids, right?
Yep.
And when we're looking at that equation, I think your story makes so much sense. Like, I might just so much money to me, but I really care about the mission.
Well, yeah, and I'll go one further. What gets really
What gets
interesting
really
is
interesting is that
you're
you're
talking
talking
to
to
a
a
donor. Imagine that gives a $100,000 gift. And that's about how much
how
the
much
donor's
the
thinking about. That donor could
donor
give
could
the
give
$100,000 gift to your C3. And then you're right, it isn't 1-for-1. So imagine it costs about $75,000 in true cost to the donor. That donor could give $75,000 to your C4. And they don't have to do anything. They don't have to file anything. They don't have to keep a record. That's just, and it's economically equivalent. So It is definitely takes a donor needs to take a moment and think about it, but when they do, it's you run the number and they can run their own number. It could be maybe it's slightly higher or lower given their tax situation, but fundamentally you can do the same gift and it has this outsized effect.
Yeah. And let's also remember, right? People who are giving to you like that, tax deduction is not the primary
It's not.
reason.
It isn't.
The result, the impact.
Yep.
That I like to say every donor wants to be able to say in some form or another, I helped make that happen,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
Is being
Yeah.
part of that. That's why they do it.
And these big, broad changes, when they happen. So I'll give you an example. New Mexico recently made childcare available to all. So that's about a $13,000 savings per family. So if your family's struggling, and lots of families are struggling, costs have been rising, having a $13,000 benefit, it doesn't, that, of course, that money isn't given out. The idea is that all of a sudden the family gets to keep that money and they get to keep that money to buy food and to cover rent and to do the things that enable a family to have some economic security. Maybe they get to save a little bit. And yeah, so all kinds of things happen, but at the cocktail party, it's certainly something to say that that all children in right in New Mexico.
So tell me 501c4
Yeah.
versus just being a corporation.
Yeah, interesting. So in 501c4, you remain a nonprofit and you remain focused on social good. You remain you're never taxed. So that's about your internal, your revenue can exceed your expense and you're not taxed on the difference. So that's an important kind of piece of the tax structure. And I think more broadly, people, once they understand you're a nonprofit, it does fit in a certain part of your mind. Like the associations are clear. So yeah, we actually began Goodnation using some impact investors and a corporation, which worked. And then the investors donated it into our foundation. So it all worked, but it certainly was a little less clear, or it was maybe slightly confusing to people who thought, oh, wait a second, you've got a corporation here and you got a nonprofit there. What's going on? So there is something about the lines. Well, I get two answers. One, there's something about understanding the lines, but there's also instances where corporations do have this ability that should be optimized. So if you can, in our case, it was we wanted to build a platform that connected donors and nonprofits, and nobody was going to give us $2.3 million, but impact investors would and did. So yes, I think it's
Because
another
there was an
tool.
opportunity for them to get a financial return or at
When
least just get their money back,
exactly,
right? I
yeah,
think
basically they donated. Eventually, they donated all the stock, and at that point, there was a value in that service. So they were able to recoup. Didn't make any money really, but they recouped, which is something.
interesting thing to think about because it really forces you to explore the spectrum of why people do things with money,
Yes.
right? Like you might do something with money to get more money back than you
Yeah.
did in the first place, like traditional investing. You might do something with money for like no money back. You could keep your original money, but you're not going to get any extra, right? Like
Yep.
if I could essentially temporarily give you $100,000 and you could do something amazing with it that would leave an impact in the world, and I could say, help make that happen. And then, all I have to do is temporarily part with my $100,000. Like, didn't really cost me anything.
Yep.
And I got to make a big difference. I might, want to let you use that money and then give you a good chunk of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
or I might want to give you all the money, or I might want to give you all the money and want my tax benefit too, right? There's so many ways to slice and dice it.
Yep.
That doesn't mean I don't want to be a support to the world, right? So it's like more options is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think you recently had Armando Zumaya join, right? Huge advocate. He's amazing. And I think what he points out is that funds are raised, funds aren't given. And so it's really everyone's kind of job on this call to understand the options and be really proactive about presenting those options, because it's not really the job of a donor to they're doing other things to be able to understand these options fully. Maybe more will become professional if we help them, give them a boost.
Right. Because people are already, just like, are scared of money and
Yep.
they're scared of like the tax code, right? Like
Yep.
this is complicated, scary stuff. So we can help them. We can help simplify it.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but my experience, my first time actually incorporating anything was not just a nonprofit, it was a school in New York
Oh,
State.
okay. Tough.
And so, first I went on to like one of the online lawyer things. They're like, oh, we don't do that. So then I started talking to local lawyers and like, yeah, no problem. And then be like, oh, we can't do that. So, I'm like a smart, nerdy person. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to dive in and get to the problem of this and read. And I finally, basically made a friend in Albany because it turns out in New York State, if you want to start a school, they are incorporated through the Department of Regents,
Yes,
which, right? So
that rings
all other
true,
corporations and nonprofits are through the Department of Labor and
but
Taxation.
not schools. No.
It's not schools. And there was one guy who does it, right? But once you learned that key piece of information, all of a sudden I realized you don't need lawyers.
Yeah.
You go to the right place, you call the person in government, they tell you what form to file and what, the paperwork needs to say, and you do what they tell you.
Yep.
And presto changeo, usually you have to pay a filing fee. You are incorporated, right? So I needed the right questions to ask, but it wasn't like really a complex legal thing. The
Yep.
hard thing was figuring out this weird, unique thing.
Well, but it also points to understanding, and I think we all should, working in the space, understand the kind of space in which we work. Or to put it differently, if we're trying to help people, creating a school, helping with food, health benefits, all these things, we need to understand the full system in which we're working. And then that's the first step, understanding. And step two is maybe that's the part of maybe that system, maybe that very system could get better. Maybe having one person in Albany who's solely responsible isn't the best. But yeah, I think it requires us as leaders to really open our eyes and think bigger maybe than we currently are. And it leads directly to more partnerships to change things, more conversations, more listening to hear what's working, what's not working. Yeah, I think it leads in a really interesting space for leaders at this time. There's so much change, and I want to kind of acknowledge the elephant in the room right now is that policies are changing, and they're changing in ways that I would argue are not helping people, and that there's a set of benefits that are actually decreasing. And there needs to be equal work to think about what's happening to those policies, but more broadly, what's happening to all of these policies that would create a more economically kind of secure America, a more productive America. Yeah. So that's the work we're working on in a broad effort around federal policies that can change poverty. And there's many. Yeah.
I want to go there for a second
Yeah.
because I think, some people who are in the work recognize, we started talking about, right? These are complex systems. And oftentimes the people making the policies aren't necessarily living inside that system. And so they just don't, there's a poor feedback loop. Like
Yep.
all values and things aside, they're like, if you don't have good feedback, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
making decisions and the consequences of those decisions don't affect you, you don't even know if they were good decisions.
Yep.
And I'll share a quick story as
Please.
I'm wondering if you have these types of stories, because I think stories of where systems break down help people see like why this is important to like really kind of get right and work through. So I had a client who they were like the only nonprofit addiction services. So like inpatient, if you're an addict, you can go there and
Yep.
have support and get clean. And they also provided mental health support programs and got people into housing. And there was money, to pay for housing for homeless people and people with mental health issues. New York State changed one of its housing requirements that you had to have been homeless for at least 10 days in order to get the money to housing. Okay, maybe on the surface makes sense. We don't want to be paying for housing for people who are basically already housed. Here's the unintended consequence. Homeless, addicts go in to get clean.
Yep.
They get clean while they are in rehab.
Yep.
They are not technically homeless.
And
And
then they
so
come out.
now, do you think that person coming out of rehab can survive sober for 10 days homeless
Right.
until they qualify for housing, right? So they inadvertently
Yeah. Unintended
closed
consequence. Yep.
that pathway.
Yep.
And like when you say it like that, and that's why I show that story, like it's so obvious, right? Like, of course, we don't want people coming out of addiction recovery to then be homeless for 10 days. Like, that's not going to work.
Yep.
So tell me, you've done a lot of this
Yeah.
work. What kinds of things do you see? What do you see now?
Yeah, I'll give you one story. So we've begun working with something called low income tax clinics, and they are not quite what they sound like. What they are not about helping people file taxes. They get involved when there is a tax controversy. And turns out that the IRS, not intentionally, but the algorithm will pick up irregularities and flags them, and then often will either halt a payment or and in the case of one person, and this was in Arizona, this person had a 1099 issued. So this gets technical. It's like dollars that were purportedly paid, and there was a mistake on it. And it was thought that this person was paid $300,000, which was not possible because this man at that was never making $300,000. But there was an error on the form, and so the IRS then considered that tax, created a tax bill based on that amount. And so this man had a family, and all of a sudden he was in this massive amount of tax debt. And so it required for the low income tax clinic, which is a legal clinic, the lawyer there pretty quickly realized that this was impossible and then created a full case, right? Showed that, okay, here is this person's wages from here to there. And then, but the end result was they wiped away this huge debt, which was on the verge. They were getting ready to collect. So that man had a house, he had a family, that would have been wiped away. So as much as these can be technical issues, like it's an algorithm problem, it really matters because there's somebody, right? It's just as in your case. If you're getting out of treatment and you have to spend 10 days, the likelihood of you not making it is high. And so, yeah, I think that decision makers, policymakers, feedback loops, we were involved in actually the biggest municipal policy survey, which again sounds dry, but it was asking people in New York City. Over 65,000 people answered what were their priorities and preferences, so that not only do we have elections, which are great, but sometimes people, once they're elected, may have forgotten the priorities of, who knows, maybe not as closely. So yeah, so having some feedback loops and ways in which I think builds out a community, which we believe in, and that's what we're doing in our poverty focused or poverty reduction focused work, is begin in communities and see what communities are asking for and need, and build it up. And stories are a big part of that. Yeah, it is really, yeah, it's essentially millions of stories that you have to kind of surface that.
How do you, from your perspective and
Mm,
experience, build good feedback loops? Because this is something that I think
yeah,
all nonprofit leaders need to be thinking about as
yeah.
they build programs, as they run businesses and organizations. What is a feedback loop, and how do you build them in?
Yeah, I'm guilty of this. I think it's important not to fall too in love with our own ideas. And so leave open the possibility that we could be entirely wrong. And that's helpful for a lot of reasons. Flexibility is important. But I think it allows us to get that balance right of like, we're going to experiment, we're going to try things, we're going to innovate, but we're not going to crash the plane as we do so. And we're going to be ready to hear. And so I'll give you a very recent example. I was on a call today where we put out a survey to over about 1,000 community foundations, and the responses back were amazing. And now what we planned and thought we were going to do is going to be different because, one, I think it's important to ask, to listen, but then to change. And so, yeah, broadly as leaders, I think that, and I think I'd fallen in love with an idea of what the program was going to be. It's not going to do that. I just have to accept that. And understand that the market, broadly understood, or the people we're aiming to help, we may be bringing really interesting ideas, but we need to be able to be flexible. And I think that's, yeah.
I just delivered a strategic plan to an organization, and same thing, right? That, going in, I'm like, it's gonna be this and this and this. And I do some listening, get some information. And this time I tried something new. I don't usually do strategic planning in that way. I usually do a very iterative process.
Yep.
But for the circumstance of this organization, they needed like a one-time thing. And I'm always worried when I'm listening, like, not just that I'm listening well, but, we have the way our brains work, we tend to be biased towards the most recent things we've heard and the very
Ah,
first things we've heard.
interesting.
And we discount the middle. And because I'm interested in how brains work. So I was like, you know
Mm,
what I'm going to do? I recorded all the sessions and I fed all the transcripts into ChatGPT because I
yeah.
was like, ChatGPT has biases, but I don't think it has those biases,
Different
right?
ones.
And
Yeah.
I'm feeding it all the information basically at the same time. And I don't know if I would have, if the themes would have emerged as clearly from the middle sessions
Yeah.
as it did. But to your, just to say that this happens all the time,
Yep.
the result of listening to the input was a very different type of plan and planned content. I would have guessed in the beginning.
Yep.
Totally different. And that makes me think, so when we do like surveys and
Hmm.
listening, that that's feedback loop in itself. Do you have thoughts about, multiple choice questions or that hard to deal with but really important data that's kind of like open-ended
Yeah.
storytelling?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Having just worked on a few surveys, I think the reality is that the survey writer has a lot of power and that should be both acknowledged and potentially, I might say, leveraged in ways that are useful. So, yeah, I think it's because part of it is which is better. Multiple choice, I think, for our brains allows us to put things into neat buckets and then we, can either be like, definitely not those. And then we find that sometimes that we question a little bit when we get, and we see it when there's a lot of A's and a lot of B's. Like people like this one, they like that one, and that there's not clarity. Yeah. So I guess that's what when we look for is like clarity. Like there's one winning answer and the rest of the data is a little bit muddied. So we would take that, we'd sort of overweight that in our minds to say, okay, people are forced in a multiple choice to make an answer. Yeah, I think that, now AI tools do allow for more, quick summaries of things. Again, trusting that there's no hallucinations as it comes through. But having a little bit more open text now, I think, is more workable because if you have 1,000 people writing to you, that's possible now. Like it
Yeah.
is, yeah, because we don't
You can
remember very well.
evaluate things
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yep.
You can capture that
And
qualitative data.
and then I would say it's really interesting. We're doing multiple surveys, but then you can kind of test again. Like you can sort of or hone deeper and then see if it does actually counterindicate or whether it's kind of moves in the same direction. Yeah, and also just to put a big old question mark around the whole thing, understanding that we got a sense for us, we're listening to a community of funders. We have a sense of the direction, but we're also going to test it. And then, right, it goes back into that loop, like just keep everything moving and don't be slow, go fast. But yeah, but stay flexible.
Yeah, that makes me think of a type of marketing survey I once learned how to
Okay.
do. So like there's a lot of surveys that are maybe more scientific. You want to like know what the general, a certain population is thinking kind of evenly, an even sample. But in marketing sometimes we're using surveys as tools beyond just that kind of use. And so the way this survey went is it asked people about, their businesses and their business challenges and just did 2, 3 short questions. And, one long answer, a couple multiple choice. But then at the end, it said if you're willing to talk more about your answers, share your phone number. Now the intent is never to call them. It
Okay.
is only it uses the assumption that if they are willing to talk to the extent that they'll leave their phone number, then they are more likely to be a buyer. And so when you grade the survey,
Yeah.
you basically only count the results. You count them 1.5 times if they left a phone number. So you weight the answers by using this assumption around intent. So you're actually using a question to help segment out the people you're really looking for. And so it's not everybody who answered. And I think of that sometimes, as you're describing that, like there are really interesting ways that the questions, they're not always about just the answer
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the
Right. Yeah.
question.
Exactly. Like the degree to which, or even people taking the time. I think we would think about it differently. The people who take the time to write, like even if they write and it makes no sense, like people who are just willing to say, "I'm taking this seriously." Yeah, you're right. Like that. That is a different category. I like the waiting idea of like formally waiting it too. Yeah. Although all these people are waiting for your phone call. They're all like, what
I
did I
mean,
do
you could
wrong?
call them, but the point was you didn't to
Yes.
call
Yeah.
them
Right.
because you could get and in general, there was a correlation between people who gave their phone number and people who give like complete
More in the answers.
answers,
Yeah.
like on a paragraph
Completely.
instead of the 3 words were, very closely correlated. All sorts of other things marketers do that's cool from there. But, well, I'll share because this is relevant. So a marketer would then they like to repurpose things. So they would then take those long answers, and here's where like a chat GPT is really helpful, pull out the common vocabulary and then reuse that vocabulary in their messaging. So they're
Yep.
literally speaking
You're like
people's
repeating.
words.
Yeah. That's
Right.
amazing.
And that is a really great tool. Like, if you want to use it for social good
Yeah.
and you now want to reach that population even more
Yeah.
and
We're literally
better,
speaking the
literally
same
speak their
language.
words
Yeah.
back to them. And they'll be like, oh my God, like it's like you know me. I'm like, or
That's
it's like we listened to what you said and just repeated your words back to you.
right. Well, but maybe you get to, weirdly, you get to the right spot. Like you're,
You do, you do.
yeah.
It's highly effective. So anyway, wow, we are really wrapping up on time. This has been such an interesting conversation. So many gold nuggets. But before we sign off, will you tell us just a little bit more about Goodnation and who should be reaching out to you or
Yeah.
Goodnation and what the best way to do that is?
Yeah, certainly. So, two quick things. One is going back to the 501c4. We do run a fiscal sponsorship program for it. So, if people want to get into C4 but don't want to go through the lawyers and the structures and all of that, we provide that service. So, that's just something that we've grown because we see a need out there. So, if people are interested in getting into the C4 work with their an existing C3, it's possible and really low, kind of easy to do. The other is if there's any community funders out there, would love to talk to you about what we're doing in terms of federal policies that affect really your community. So you can reach me at my email, rob@goodnation.io. That's rob@goodnation.io.
Well, thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you,
And
Sarah.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you out there for listening and all you do to make our communities better, to make our systems better, whether that's large scale or just a small system. Even a small system for your own team that works well can make a big difference. I have a favor to ask of you out there. Please take a moment to like and review this podcast, hit that subscribe button, and share it with a friend or colleague who would benefit from these conversations. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I wish you all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.